Join me as we learn Chitas for Tuesday, the third Torah reading in Parshas Mikeitz, chapter 41, verse 39. Yesterday we learned where Yosef came and interpreted the dreams for Pharaoh. Not only did he interpret the dreams, but he also gave advice to Pharaoh that they should store food for the 7 years of plenty, from the 7 years of plenty for the 7 years of hunger, and appoint somebody that will be in charge of the storage that will be controlled by Pharaoh. Pharaoh and his servants appreciate and like the advice and the interpretation of Yosef's dreams. Today we continue as Pharaoh appoints Yosef to be the one in charge. Verse 39. Vayomer Pari al Yosef, and Pharaoh tells Yosef, Achrei yediah le'kima ischa, being that God made you aware of all this to you, as kol zeis all this, ein novin v'chacham kamecha. There is no one as discerning and as wise as you. Verse 39, Rashi. Ein noven v'chacham kamecha, levakesh, ish novin v'chacham shamarta, to find this individual, like you said, that should be just as smart and just as wise to be able to do the job. Lo nimtza kamecha, there's nobody else as worthy for the job as you. Verse 40. Atati al Beisi, you will be in charge of my court. Al picha yishak kol armi, and by your orders will all my people be provided for. Rak hakisei egdal mimeka, only the throne will I outrank you by. You're going to be the viceroy, and I will then be in charge. Nasati Rashi yishak. What does the word yishak mean? Kitarkuma yitzin yitzparnis. They're going to be fed through you. Kol tzarchei amei yunasam alecha. All the needs of my nation will be done through you. Uben meshek basic meinash kuvar. We have other places that the word yishak means to feed, to take care of, like Eliezer was called Ben Meshek Basi, the one in charge of his household. Rak hakisei, only the throne. Sheyu koydon li melech. I will be called king, and you will be the viceroy, second in command. Kisei, what does it mean, the throne? Loshin Shem Amlucha mean the title king. And his throne was higher than the others, meaning the idea that King Solomon at that point was even greater in his kingship than King David. The Torah now continues on verse 42. Verse 41. Vayomer Pari al Yosef, and Pari says to Yosef, behold, I hereby confer you with power over in the entire of Egypt. Nasati Oischa, what does it mean? I give you. Manisa Oischa, I appoint you. Afal Pekain, and still in all, Lashon Nesino, it's called giving. Like God says, they will put us greater. Bein le'gdula, bein le'shiflus. You give a person, whether it's making them greater or whether demoting them. Neifel, Lashon Nesina, you all still, it is appropriate to use the terminology to give. We find that in Malachi that God uses the terminology, I've given you to be humiliated, as well it's always giving, whether I'm giving a person a promotion or a demotion, the terminology is still giving. Verse 42. Pharaoh removed his signet ring, Me'al Yodeh, from his hand, and he put it on Yosef's hand. And he had dressed him in robes of linen. And he put a gold chain, he placed a gold chain around his neck. 42, Rashi. Giving a ring of a king as a sign. To whoever the king gives it to, he appoints him to be second in command, second in greatness, the vice king. Bigdei sheish, linen. Why? Devar chashivasu was considered important b'Mitzrayim in Egypt. Revid, a chain. Anok, a big chain that was then, revid means on chain. It was a chain that was then put on his neck as beauty and as an adornment. The reason why it's called revid is because it's considered with a bunch of rings that are one after the other. Kara revid, it's called a chain. We also find Marvadim Ravadati Arshi, Ritzafti Arshi Martzafes, different terminologies, whether it's in Mishlei or in other places where we use the same terminology of something which is in a circle and a chain linked one with the other. And in the Mishnah, also find the terminology Mukav Revdin Shaleven, if it was in a circle that is chained with stone. Ala Reivid Shabasara, on the fourth circle, which is the Nazar of Yiritzpah, that was the floor that was there at the time, one by one. Verse 43. And then he had him ride in his second royal chariot. Asher loy, that was his. Vayikru lefanav, and they called before him, they proclaimed before him. Avrich v'nosen loy, the king's counselor. And he was, and how wise. Avrich v'nosen loy, or bend the knee before him. You have to bow to him. V'nosen is al kol eretz Mitzrayim, and he was given the authority over all of Egypt. The Merkeves HaMishnah, what does it mean, Merkeves HaMishnah? Hashnil Merkavti, the second in command, the second royal chariot that was there. Not the one that the king did, but the second one. Hamalechas Eitzel Shaloi, that goes next to the king's. What is this word Avrich? And if you notice, we said bend the knee. That means there's different interpretations to what the word Avrich means. Rashi over here first tells us the Targum, the Aramaic translation, and he says, Dain Abel Malka. He is like a father who's part of the home of the king. He is in charge of the home of the king. The word reich in Aramaic or Roman language is melech, king. In Perek HaShutfim we see this as well. Lo reik v'lo bareik. And the Talmud says he's not a king and not the son of a king. So you saw the word reik comes from a king. Ubedivri Agada, the Medrash brings a interesting controversy about this. Darish Rabbi Yehuda said, Avrich, why was he called Avrich? Zeh Yosef, this is Yosef. Because he was called through of B'chachma, he was a father in knowledge and wisdom. V'rach, but he was young, b'shanim, in years. So if you look at the word Avrich, it's made out of two words. Av, Rach. The father in wisdom, Rach, young in years. Amr li Rabbi Yossi ben Drumaskis. Rabbi Yossi of Drumaskis tells Rabbi Yehuda, the Mosayatamavi Salinu Eksuvim. When are you, how long is it going to be that you're going to continue to corrupt? Meaning you're explaining the verses in such far-fetched type of ways. Ein Avrich, if you take the word Avrich doesn't explain the way you say it. Ella b'lashim berkayim, it comes from the word beirach, berkayim, knees. Why? That everybody had to bend their knees when they come to him and bow to him. Shnemer, as it says, that he was in charge of Egypt, being that, look in the continuing of the verse, that he was Avrich v'nosanesa, he was Avrich and he was in charge. Because he was in charge, therefore everybody had to bend their knees when they would approach him. Verse 44. Vayomer Pari on Yosef, and Pari says to Yosef, Ani Paroi, I am Pharaoh. Ubeladecha layormish, and without your say, no man will lift his hand. As Yodev, as Ragli, his hand or his foot, Bechol Eretz Mitzrayim, in all of Egypt. His hand to bear weapons, or his foot to mount a horse. As we see in Rashi, Ani Paroi, I am Paroi. Why does he have to say first I am Paroi? He's telling him, I have the ability to make decrees on my nation. And with that power, I now make a decree. That nobody shall lift their hand without your permission. Without your permission. Another explanation is, Ani Paroi, I am Paroi, meaning, Ani Melech. I'm going to be the king. I'm always going to be the king. I'm going to be one up you. And when your permission, this is similar to what he said before, that only the throne, he wanted to make sure he makes it clear, even while he's giving him the ring. His foot and hand, doesn't mean literally his foot and hand, like the Targum explains, meaning one to hold a weapon or one to mount a horse. An interesting medrash over here, which tells us about what Pharaoh was actually alluding to, is because it was the custom in Egypt that in order to be a king, you had to be fluent in 70 languages. This was expected of royalty. Like this, Pharaoh was able to rule over his nation by force, but therefore he was also able to control their minds as well, because he was able to speak in multiple languages that they did not know. Over here, Yosef, in order for him to be king, as he spoke to Pharaoh, the Medrash tells us that he spoke in different languages, and as he came up to the throne, he greeted Pharaoh by saying Shalom Aleichem, saying Hebrew. Pharaoh did not know Hebrew, and therefore Pharaoh lets him know, I know Hebrew. I am king, even though I know one language more than you. I make you swear that you don't tell anybody. And as we're going to see later on in Parshas Vayechi, that his father tells him, swear to me that you'll bury me in the land of Israel. Why specifically swear? Because I know that you swore to Pharaoh that you would not say that you know one more language. And if he tells you to break that oath, you'll tell him, I'll break the oath that I made with you, and I'll tell people that I know one more language, and therefore I'll be able to be king. The interesting thing is that the Talmud also tells us that Yosef was taught all 70 languages by Gavriel, the night before, so he should be able to converse with Pharaoh in all the different languages. What was the need that Yosef should know all the languages? That was also worked later on because all the nations of the world would come to Pharaoh, to Egypt, because Egypt was a superpower, and thereby Yosef was able to converse with all the nations of the world. The Tehillim, when we find Yosef's name, he has an added hey, as it says, Eidus b'Yosef Samei. And the added hey, just like Avram added hey, and with this he became the father of all nations, so to Yosef with that added hey, and the knowledge, the hey that comes from Bina, and that's why he's constantly called a Novain, that he had the Bina, the extra wisdom, and the 70 languages that he was able to converse with the nations of the world, which gave him the control of the nations of the world, like his grandfather Avraham. The Jews were continuing to lead the nations of the world. Verse 45. Vayikra Pari Shem Yosef, and Pari called the name of Yosef Tzofnas Paneach, gave him the name Tzofnas Paneach, one who deciphers the cryptic. Vayiton lo yes Osnas, and he gave him also Osnas Bas Potifera, the daughter of Potifera, Koyin Oin, who was a lord in Egypt. Leisha, to him for his wife, the lord of On, to him as a wife. And Yosef was then went out to oversee Egypt. Tzofnas Paneach, what does the word Tzofnas Paneach mean? Mifade Shatzvoines, he's able to interpret, to decrypt, to decipher the hidden. The Ein Lef Paneach Dimyon. We don't find any other time that this word Paneach should be explained in the verse of what it means. Potifera, what does the word Potifera mean? Who is this Potifera? Who? Potifar. This is the same guy, Potifar. And he was called Potifera over here because V'nikra Potifera. Why was he called Potifera? Lefisha Nistaris Me'alav, because he became castrated on his own. He became infertile. Because Lefisha Chomad As Yosef Lamishkav Zachar, because he desired Yosef for sodomy, and because of that he became infertile, and he was sodomized. He was castrated. Verse 46. The Yosef ben Shloshim Shana, and Yosef was 30 years old at the time. Just an interesting note as well. Who was this girl, Osnas? According to many commentaries, Osnas happened to be the daughter of Dinah. Over here she's called the daughter of Potifera, and that we see later on, as we're going to see when we come to Parshas Vayechi. The Yosef ben Shloshim Shana, Yosef was at this time 30 years old. But Lifnei Pari, when he stood before Pharaoh, Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt, Vayetze Yosef Lifnei Pari, and Yosef left Pharaoh's presence, Vayaver b'chol eretz Mitzrayim, and he traveled throughout the entire land of Egypt. Verse 47, and now the 7 years of plenty began. So during these 7 years of plenty, the land gathered grain in handfuls. Verse 48, Rashi, koimitz al koimitz, yad al yad, in handfuls, they gathered from all over, and they would make these big warehouses of gatherings of food. 48. And Yosef collected all the surplus of food during these 7 years. That was in the land of Egypt. And he then placed food and storage complexes in the cities. The food that he placed with food in the fields in the surrounding city of where they had grown. So if there was food was growing in the fields, he put them in the surrounding cities, so they should be for those fields that they were. As Rashi explains, every single, what does it mean? All the different fields that had cities, that every land, had a certain type of soil that would grow the grain that was particular to that place. So they would put the wheat and a little bit of that earth of that place together with the wheat, because it would keep the wheat from spoiling, from getting rotten. So besides the actual wheat and grain that he put in the warehouses, he put the earth, the soil, from that grain, so it would stop it from spoiling. Vayitzbar Yosef bor, and Yosef collected quantities, kechil hayom, as abundant as the sand of the sea, harba miyod, very much, at kichad lisper, until they were no longer able to count, ki ein misper, because there was no count to it, there was too much to count. 49, at kichad lisper, The one that was counting how much wheat he had had to stop counting. It's a shortened verse. Because there was no number. The word ki in this case is giving an explanation for the previous statement that he said. Why did he stop counting? Because there wasn't a number to count it anymore. Verse 50. And Yosef gave birth to 2 sons. When were these 2 sons born? B'terem tavish nasarav. This was before the years of hunger, of famine arrived. Asher yoldolei osnas bas Potifera kohen. These were the children that Osnas, his wife, gave birth. Who Osnas was the daughter of Potifera, the lord of On. B'terem tavish nasarav. Before the years of famine came. Why does the Torah have to tell that to us when the children were born, specifically that they were born before the years of famine? Telling us Allah here. From here we learn a person is not allowed to be intimate in the year of hunger, as people are suffering, and one is not allowed to have extra pleasure at that time. The Torah now continues on verse 51. Vayikra Yosef Hashem Abchar Menashe. And Yosef named his first son Menashe, his older son Menashe. Hinoshani Elokim Eskol Amali. Because God has made me forget all my hardships, Eskol Beis Avi, and all of my father's household. Verse 52. Shem Hasheni Kara Ephraim, and the name of his second son he named Ephraim. Because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. As the Rebbe explains, the 2 names of Menashe and Ephraim that Yosef named them are a sign of how we have to live in exile. Number 1, Menashe to long for what he was missing, but at the same time to recognize the blessings that God has given us, that even in a place of suffering he was able to prosper. But always never forget where we came from and what we longed for the coming of Moshiach. This concludes the third Torah reading, Parshas Mikeitz.